When Russia invaded Ukraine, the world didn't respond with soldiers. It responded with money. Banks were cut off. Assets were frozen. Trade routes were blocked. This wasn't an accident. It was deliberate. Sanctions are the cleanest weapon modern states can use. They don't explode. They don't bleed. They quietly lock doors. But here's the twist. When you lock the main doors, the side doors get busy. Sanctions don't end trade. They redesign it. And in today's world, when money can't move digitally, it moves physically. That's where this story begins. Not with tanks, not with missiles, but with gold. To understand why gold matters, we first need to understand sanctions. Think of the global financial system like a giant highway. Countries move money across it every day, paying for food, energy, weapons, and labor. Sanctions are roadblocks. They don't destroy the cars. They don't erase the money. They just stop certain drivers from using the road. So basically, they don't erase money. They block the path. After the invasion of Ukraine, Russia faced the largest sanctions regime in modern history. Hundreds of billions of dollars were frozen. Banks were disconnected. Foreign reserves became unreachable. Think, a giant vault behind glass. Money you can see but can't use. Imagine having a massive savings account and suddenly being told you can see it, but you can't touch it. That's what happened. And when that happens, a country has two choices: stop operating or adapt. Russia chose adaptation. Not overnight, not suddenly. Years before the war, Russia had already started preparing. It reduced its exposure to Western currencies. It moved the reserves home. And most importantly, it accumulated gold. Because gold doesn't sit in foreign banks. Gold doesn't rely on trust between governments. Gold doesn't need permission to exist. Gold is a value you can hold. Gold is different from modern money. Dollars and euros are promises. They exist inside systems. Gold is physical. You can touch it. You can store it. You can move it. And most importantly, you can change it. When gold is mined, it has a story to tell. Which country does it come from? Which mine? Who dug it out? However, when gold is melted and refined, a critical process occurs. It loses its memory. In other words, once it's melted, the story gets blurry. Here's a simple way to understand it. Imagine you melt crayons from 10 different boxes into one block of wax. When it cools, you can't tell which crayon came from which box. Gold works the same way. Once it's refined to very high purity, even experts struggle to prove its origin. That makes gold the perfect loophole in a world of sanctions. Because sanctions depend on labels. This money is allowed, that money is not. But gold doesn't carry labels once it's refined. It becomes just gold, not wires, routes, not apps, middlemen, not banks, refineries. This is why gold has always been useful in times of crisis. Wars, collapses, sanctions. And this is why Russia didn't just hold gold. It needed a system that could move gold. And somewhere in that system is a courier. A person whose whole job is simple: move value when the official road is blocked. Which brings us to geography. Gold doesn't move itself. It needs refineries, markets, traders. And there is one place that has quietly built all three: the United Arab Emirates. Russia doesn't need African gold because it loves Africa. It needs African gold because sanctions don't just block money, they block conversion. In war, value has to become spendable, and the Western system won't process Russian values anymore. So, Russia leans on what the West can't freeze: physical commodities. Gold is the cleanest one. But here's the key. A war burns cash fast. So the question becomes, where do you find enough gold, quietly, at scale. That's why Africa matters. Not because Africa is the plan, but because Africa is the supply, especially in places where paperwork is weak and mining is informal. Now watch the route. African gold leaves the ground. It moves through informal channels. It reaches the UAE, where the system asks only for weight and purity, not origin. Once it's refined, it becomes anonymous metal. And anonymous metal can be sold for hard currency, which can then fund anything: imports, influence, and yes, war. That is the missing connection. Africa supplies the metal. The UAE cleans the identity. Russia gains a spendable lifeline. The UAE built its economy to be a crossroads, a place where money from everywhere can meet. East and West, friends and rivals, sanctioned and unsanctioned. Gold markets flourished, refineries expanded, free trade zones reduced friction. In Dubai, wealth doesn't just arrive. It lands, parks, and gets processed. And gold is the cleanest thing to process. And most importantly, the system focused on two things: weight, purity, not origin. And that matters, because if origin doesn't matter here, then sanctioned money can hide inside clean metal. Researchers who compare what African countries say they export with what the UAE says it imports noticed something strange. The numbers don't match. If the seller says 10 and the buyer says 20, the missing 10 didn't vanish. It moved in the dark. Africa reports exporting less gold than the UAE reports importing. That missing gap isn't small. Over time, it adds up to thousands of tons of gold, worth over $100 billion. This doesn't automatically mean crime, but it does mean one thing: a lot of gold is moving without clear paperwork. And gold without paperwork is perfect for anyone trying to escape financial pressure. So the pipeline forms. Gold leaves the ground in Africa. It moves through informal routes. It enters refineries. It exists as anonymous metal. It re-enters the global system as clean wealth. At that point, sanctions can't see it. That's step 3 of the pipeline, the wash. And the courier doesn't disappear here. This is where the handoff gets safer. Gold doesn't come from vaults. It comes from people. In many African countries, gold mining is not industrial. It's manual. Men, women, and children dig with hand tools, shallow pits, narrow tunnels. These are called artisanal mines. For millions, they're the only way to survive. But when gold prices rise and demand explodes, pressure moves down the chain, fast. Smuggling becomes more profitable than legal trade. Taxes are avoided. Rules are ignored. And when rules disappear, the weakest suffer first. Investigators have documented children working in mines instead of schools. Some trafficked across borders. Others are trapped by debt. They dig holes barely wider than their shoulders, sometimes 20 meters deep. No safety beams, no protection. During rainy season, the tunnels collapse. Adults avoid mining then. For some families, skipping the mine doesn't mean safety. It means no dinner. Children don't get that choice. This isn't because buyers in rich cities want children underground. It's because the system doesn't stop it. When buyers only ask about weight and purity, everything else becomes invisible. The system stays clean by pushing the dirt to the bottom. There's another cost, too. When gold is smuggled, governments don't collect taxes. Here's why that matters. No taxes mean fewer schools and hospitals. That money could fund schools, hospitals, infrastructure. Instead, it disappears. And when governments lose revenue, armed groups step in. They tax the mines. control routes, protect shipments. Gold stops being a resource. It becomes fuel for instability. And the courier feels this part too, because the cheapest route is often the most violent one. What we're witnessing isn't just smuggling. It's the formation of a new system, a sanctions economy, a backup system for countries that get locked out. When countries are locked out of the main financial system, they don't stop trading. They build parallel routes. Gold becomes the bridge. It turns African dirt into a currency Russia can spend without Western permission. It doesn't care about politics. It doesn't care about alliances. It only cares about trust. And gold has had trust for thousands of years. That's why this story isn't only about Russia or Africa or the UAE. It's about how pressure reshapes behavior, and how every attempt to control one system creates incentives somewhere else. And once the gold re-enters the system as clean, the next shipment becomes easier. That's step 5, re-entry. And it's why the pipeline keeps repeating. Gold is sold as timeless, pure, perfect. But in today's world, the cleaner the gold looks, the harder it is to see the story behind it. And until the world demands the story behind the metal, gold will keep doing what it does best. Moving quietly, crossing borders, forgetting loudly.